The seed drill went into the cold ground on a Tuesday in October, and by noon, 3 wagons had stopped on the section road to watch a man plant wheat in the wrong season. Anton Rice did not look up at them. He walked behind the drill with his hand on the lever, feeling for the catch that told him the tubes were feeding even, and he let the horses set their own pace across ground that had been broken that summer and had lain open ever since. The furrows smelled of rain that had not come. Behind him, the seed fell into the dark and disappeared, and the harrow teeth pulled the soil closed over it, like a hand closing over a coin. He was 34 years old. He had 80 acres, a mortgage note he had signed with a hand that shook, a sod house with 1 glass window, and a canvas trunk under the bed with his mother's name stitched into the lid. What the men on the road could see from where they sat was a foreigner walking a field in the fall like a fool. What they could not see was that the seed running through those tubes was red. Not the pale golden kernel every man in that county sowed in the spring. Hard, dark, stubborn red, the color of a dried cherry, so hard between the teeth that a man could crack a molar on it if he chewed without thinking. His mother had sifted that seed by hand, kernel by kernel, on the other side of an ocean in the last autumn of her life. She had picked out the shrunken ones and the split ones and the ones the weevils had touched, and she had filled a sack the size of a pillow, and she had sewn it shut herself with waxed thread because she did not trust a knot. She had told him, sit with it. Do not let them put it in the hold with the freight. Sit with it. He had sat with it, 31 days on the water with the sack between his knees. His father had gone into the sea on the 11th day of that crossing, wrapped in sailcloth, and Anton had not let go of the sack even then, because letting go of it would have meant there was nothing left of the place they came from at all. He's going to lose the whole 80, one of the men on the road said, loud enough to carry. Frost'll take it before Christmas. Anton reached the end of the row, lifted the drill, turned the team, and set the tubes down again, going the other way. Only one person on that road did not laugh, and she was not on the road. She was standing at the corner of her own fence, a quarter-mile east, with a bucket in one hand, and she'd been standing there long enough for the handle to have printed a line across her palm. Her name was Hannah Fisk. She had come out to that country with a husband who had been good with animals and careless with his own body, and a bad winter had taken him inside of 6 days, and the deed had stayed in her name because he had had the sense to write it that way before he ever got sick. She was 32. She had no children, which the town had opinions about, and she had learned to hear those opinions the way a person hears wind at a window, which is to say, constantly and without ever quite getting used to it. She had watched Anton Rice all summer. She had watched him break sod with a walking plow when other men were already sitting in the shade. She had watched him carry water to his horses before he drank himself. And now she watched him plant a field in October while grown men laughed at him from a wagon seat. And she watched him never once give them the satisfaction of turning his head. That evening, she walked the quarter-mile with a jar wrapped in a dish towel. "It's only beans," she said, when he came to the door of the sod house with his hands still black to the wrist. "I made too many. It happens when you cook for one and forget." He looked at the jar and did not take it right away, and she felt the heat come up her neck and thought, well, that is that. Then he stepped back from the doorway and said, "Then you should not have to eat all of them alone." They ate at a plank table with the door propped open for the light. She asked him why October. He tried to explain it in English and ran out of English, and then he did something she had not expected. He got up, went to the bed, pulled out the canvas trunk, and set a handful of the red kernels on the table between them. "This one sleeps," he said. He pushed the kernels into a small pile with one finger. "In the cold, it does not die. It sleeps in the ground, and in the spring, it is already awake before your seed is even in the sack. 2 months. 3. He shrugged. "It is not brave. It is only early." She picked up a kernel and pressed it with her thumbnail and could not mark it. "And nobody here plants it," she said. "Nobody here has buried anybody at sea for it," he said, and then looked as if he wished he had not said it, and she let him off by asking whether he wanted more beans. I want to stop here for just a moment. This story has found listeners in Brazil, in Nigeria, in India, in the Philippines, in Mexico, in South Africa, in places I never imagined a story like this would travel to. If you are one of them, sitting somewhere tonight and hearing this for the first time, this channel is still young and we are only getting started. If this story has found a place in your heart, hit subscribe before you go anywhere. It helps more than you know, and it means we get to keep bringing you nights like this one. Now let us get back, because the ground was about to go hard, and everything Anton Rice owned in the world was under it. Winter came in low and gray and stayed. The field greened faintly in November, a haze of thin blades barely a finger high, and then the cold shut it down and the snow came, and there was nothing to look at but white ground and the fence posts marking where the 80 ended. That is when the talking got worse, because in that country, winter gives men nothing to do but talk. Vernon Kell did most of it. Kell farmed 400 acres on the good bottom north of the creek, sat on the board of the Grain Association, and had a way of saying a cruel thing so pleasantly that a man could not object to it without looking thin-skinned. At the association meeting in the schoolhouse, he stood up with his hat in his hand and said he did not want anyone to think he was making sport of a neighbor. And then he made sport of a neighbor for 11 minutes. "Boys, he's got a field of dead grass out there," Kell said. "I've farmed this ground 20 years. Wheat goes in the spring. Ground freezes down 2 feet out here. Whatever that man buried in October is buried for good." Somebody asked what kind of seed it even was. "Red," Kell said, and let the word sit there. "Red as a brick. I had a look at a handful of it. The mill won't take it. Ask Delacroix. His stones are set for soft wheat, and that hard kernel comes off the burrs, looking like sand and gray flour, and no woman in this county is going to buy gray flour. So say it comes up. Say God himself waters it. Who buys it?" That was the part Anton had no answer for, and he knew it, sitting in the back row with his hat on his knee, understanding maybe 7 words in 10, and all 7 of the ones that mattered. Hannah Fisk was in that schoolhouse too, at the end of a bench, and when the meeting broke up, she waited for him outside in the cold. "He's right about the mill," she said. "I know it." "He's right, and he's still wrong," she said. "A mill can be changed. A season cannot." Anton looked at her for a long moment in the light coming out of the schoolhouse door. Nobody in that country had said a sentence like that to him since he stepped off the boat. "Say it again," he said. "Slower. I want to keep it." I want to pause the story here for a second, because that line has always stayed with me. A mill can be changed. A season cannot. Almost everybody listening tonight has been on one side of that sentence at some point, standing in front of people who were technically correct and completely wrong about you. So let me ask you something, and answer it in the comments if you feel like it, because I do read them. Has there ever been something you knew was right, and you kept doing it anyway, while people you respected told you it was foolish? And tell me one more thing while you're down there, just because I like knowing where these stories travel. Where are you listening from tonight? And what are you doing while you listen? Now let us get back, because spring came early that year, and it came for everybody at once. The snow went off in the second week of what should still have been winter. The creek ran brown and full for 4 days and then dropped, and the ground came up out of it soft and dark and warm, and Anton Rice walked out to his field before the frost was fully out of the shady side of the draw. It was green, not the pale haze of November. Green the way a lawn is green, thick enough that when the wind came over it, the whole 80 moved like water. He knelt down in the middle of it and put his hand flat on the ground and stayed there long enough that Hannah, watching from her fence line, thought something might be wrong with him. Nothing was wrong with him. He was listening to his mother sew a sack shut with waxed thread. By the time Vernon Kell's spring wheat went into the ground, Anton's field was 6 inches high and tillering out. By the time Kell's came up in thin new rows, Anton's was knee-deep and starting to joint. Men slowed their wagons on the section road again that spring, but they did not laugh, and that bothered Kell more than anything. So Kell went at it from the other direction, which is what men like that always do. He did not argue with the field. He argued with the paper. The note on Anton's 80 was held at the bank in town, and Kell sat on that board too. In April, a letter came out with a rider on it that Anton had to take to Hannah to read twice. And even then, she had to read it a third time before she would say it out loud. "They're calling the balance," she said. "Not the payment, the whole balance. On the 1st of August. August is before I sell," Anton said. "August is before anybody sells." Hannah set the letter down flat on the table and smoothed it with her hand as though it had wronged the table. "They know that. That is why it is August. Can they do this? There's a clause. There is always a clause." She looked up at him. "It says the bank can call the note if the security is being farmed in a manner that endangers the value of the land. They are saying your crop is a wild experiment. They are saying you damage your own security the day you planted it." Anton laughed. It was the first time she'd ever heard him do it, and it was not a happy sound. "The field is the best field in the county," he said. "I know. They can look at it from the road." "They have," Hannah said. "That is the problem." He went to town on the 6th of May and stood in front of the counter and asked for an extension until October, and the bank was very polite, and the answer was no. Kell was in the lobby when he came out, and he did not say anything cruel. He said something worse. "When you can't make that August payment," Kell said, "come see me before you let the bank take it. I'll give you a fair price for the 80 and something on top for whatever's standing in that field. Seed's worth something to a man with the patience to try it slow." He put his hat on. "No hard feelings, Rice. It's business, and business isn't personal." "It is personal," Anton said. "You only say it is not so that you can sleep." That is where things stood at the end of May. A field of hard red winter wheat, heading out 3 weeks ahead of every other field in that country, and a note coming due before a single bushel of it could be turned into $1. They came in June, from the northwest, in the middle of the afternoon. The first sign was the light. Hannah was pinning a sheet on the line and noticed the shadow of the house had gone soft at the edges, and she looked up expecting a thunderhead and saw instead a haze like smoke, but too even and too high and moving too fast for smoke. Then she heard it, and it was not thunder. It was a dry sound, a crackling hiss, like 100,000 people rubbing paper between their fingers. The Rocky Mountain locusts came down out of the northwest that summer in a column that darkened the sun the way a heavy cloud does. And when they landed everywhere at once. They landed on the sheet on the line, and the sheet came down with them. They landed on the fence wire until the wire sagged. They went into the well, into the water barrel, into the churn, into the henhouse. They ate the handles off the pitchforks, where the sweat of a man's hands had salted the wood. They ate the wool off a live sheep. Men beat at them with sacks, and the sacks came apart. And they ate the wheat. Vernon Kell's 400 acres of spring wheat was standing green and soft and half grown, exactly the stage a locust wants most, and it was gone in a day and a half. Not damaged. Gone. Ground stubble and bare dirt as far as a man could see from his own doorstep, and the sound of it going on all night. Anton Rice had cut his 80-11 days earlier. The wheat that had gone into the cold ground in October had wintered under the snow, jumped in the first warm week, headed out in May, and gone hard and gold and brittle by the first week of June. He had put a crew of 2 on it, and cut it, and shocked it, and hauled it into the barn. And when the sky went dark, he stood in the barn door and looked out at his own field, and there was nothing left out there for the locusts to take but stubble. They took the garden. They took the young orchard whips. They took Hannah's corn. But the wheat, the whole 26 wagon loads of it, was already inside 4 walls. When the swarm lifted 3 days later and went on southeast, the county came out of its houses into a landscape the color of a burned match, and every single person in it had the same thought at almost the same hour. That foreigner's grain is in the barn. They came to him. That is the part I want you to sit with, not one at a time, and not humbly at first. They came in wagons with their hats in their hands and their pride in their pockets, men who had laughed on the section road in October, and they stood in Anton Rice's yard and asked to buy seed for the fall. He could have named any number he wanted. Every one of them knew it. There was no seed wheat in that county that had not been eaten in the field, or that was not soft spring seed, which would only be eaten again. And the man with a barn full of hard red kernels could have written his own gospel that week. Hannah Fisk stood on his step while he thought about it, and she did not tell him what to do, and he never forgot that either. "Same price the elevator paid last fall," Anton said. "For seed. Every man takes what his ground will hold and no more, and pays me after his own harvest, not before." There was a long silence in that yard. "After," one of them repeated. "After," Anton said. "A man who has nothing cannot pay me now, and I do not want a field that a man lost. I want a county that plants in October." He wrote it all down himself, in a school copybook, in his own crooked English, with Hannah spelling the harder words out loud for him. 31 names before the week was out. The 1st of August came, and the bank came with it, and Anton walked in and put $640 on the counter. That was what 26 wagon loads had brought at a mill 3 days down the rail line, where a miller with a broken rock crusher and nothing left to lose had agreed to reset his burrs wide and run the hard kernel slow. It took the man 2 weeks and a great deal of cursing to get flour that was not gray. When he finally did, it came off the stones the color of cream, and it made a loaf that stood up taller than anything that mill had turned out in its life, because that hard red kernel carries more of what makes bread rise. The bank counted the money twice. Vernon Kell lost 200 of his 400 acres that year, not to the Locusts, but to his own note, which nobody offered to carry for him. He came out to the rice place in September, alone, and sat in his buggy without getting down. "I'll want seed," he said, "for the north bottom, whatever you can spare." Anton looked at him for a while. "Take what your ground holds," he said. "Pay me after harvest." Kell's jaw worked. "Same terms as the others." "Same terms as the others." "Why?" "Because you are my neighbor," Anton said, "and because a season is longer than a grudge." Kell drove off without another word. That fall, he planted red wheat in October like everybody else, and he never in his life apologized, and it did not matter. Anton and Hannah were married in the schoolhouse in November, with the fields already showing that thin green haze on both sides of the section road for as far as the eye could go. She wore a gray wool dress, because it was the good one, and it was cold. He stood there in a borrowed coat with his hands scrubbed raw, and when the minister asked him the question, he answered in the wrong language and had to be told, and answered again in English, and the whole schoolhouse laughed, and this time he laughed with them. She moved her stock over that week. He tore out the fence between the two places in the spring, and the 80 and her quarter section became one piece of ground with one gate. They had a long life on it. There were bad years. There was a hailstorm that flattened 40 acres in 9 minutes, and a year the rust got into the crop, and 2 summers so dry that the wheat came up short and thin, and they lived off the seed loans coming back to them from other men's harvests. They never got rich. That country did not really do rich, but they got old there, which is a different kind of luck. Years later, on an October afternoon, an old man sat on a porch that had been built onto the front of a sod house, long since given a proper frame and a second glass window, and he listened. That was what he did in October. He sat and he listened. The sound came from every direction at once by then. Seed drills, a dozen of them, some near and some so far off that the noise arrived thin and delayed, working the ground on every quarter section in sight, all of them running in the fall, all of them dropping that dark, stubborn kernel into cold soil to sleep under the snow. It sounded, he had told his wife once, like a very large animal breathing. Hannah came out with 2 cups and sat down beside him in the other chair, and neither of them said anything for a while. because after that many years, the silence was most of the conversation. "They were on the road again this morning," she said finally. "3 wagons stopped up by your old fence line. Laughing?" "Watching," she said. "The Dunbar man has a new drill and cannot set the depth on it, and the rest of them were telling him he had put it in too deep." Anton Rice smiled with his eyes closed. Somewhere in the house, in a canvas trunk with a woman's name stitched into the lid, there was still a sack the size of a pillow, sewn shut with waxed thread that had never been opened and never would be. He had planted from every other sack he owned, not that one. That one had crossed an ocean between a young man's knees while his father went into the water, and it was not seed anymore. It was the whole reason. Here is what I keep coming back to with this one. Everybody on that section road in October was an expert. 20 years of farming that ground, most of them, and not one of them was lying about a single thing they knew. They were right about the frost. They were right about the mill. They were right that nobody around there had ever done it. Being right about all of that did not save 1 acre of their wheat, because they were answering a question the season had already stopped asking. And the man walking behind the drill was not braver than they were. He said so himself. He was only early, and early is a strange kind of courage, because it looks exactly like being wrong right up until the day it does not. So if you are out there tonight doing the thing everybody in your life has told you is the wrong season for, I am not going to promise you that locusts will come and prove you right. Sometimes they never come, and you just have to live with knowing. But I would ask you to hold on to whatever your version of that sack is. The one you carry because of who sewed it shut. Plant from the others. Keep that one. Sleep well tonight, wherever you are.